Hey guys, welcome to Tea Talk. It is May 21st. I almost said 31st. Oh gosh, I'm like a week ahead in my mind. So, welcome tonight. We are sure to have, I think, a pretty exciting Tea Talk tonight. So, it looks like also we may be having trouble streaming to Facebook for some reason with StreamYard tonight. So, hopefully, they can get that fixed. So if you've joined, please make sure that you put your name in the comments and let me know where you're from. So it looks like we've got Aline back. Hi, from Florida. I know where you are. And we've got Ricky from Las Vegas, hailing from Las Vegas. I'm sure it's hot there. Right here in Florida, it's on the coast where I am. It's like in the 90s in the afternoon, and the humidity is so bad. It's crazy. It's really crazy. And oh, hi Chantilly. Thank you for joining. Yep, you're in sunny Florida also. Madison, hi. Got a lot of Floridians representing tonight. Oh, Lindsay, Tennessee. We knew you had to drop in with the Tennessee. Is it still rainy there? I know last week it was raining a lot. Hopefully it's better. Oh, Ricky, I'm so jealous. It's 87 with no humidity. I like that dry air. I really do. It's a lot easier to breathe out there. So we're going to give another minute here to let other people kind of get joining and acclimated again. There seems to be something wrong with the streaming to Facebook. I've got the green light though for LinkedIn and for YouTube. So hopefully it's not affecting too many people on the Facebook side. I know a couple people typically join from there. Oh, so Lindsay, it's finally sunny and 79 today. Well, good. I'm glad. Hopefully the rain though washed away some of that pollen, because we started getting it here again kind of bad too with the grass, that grass pollen. It's like madness here. So let's see here. I am going to just throw out some reminders. We have gotten a few more requests from some of the attendees for topics from the email address here, ttalk@stalkinghorseLLC.com. So we're going to be adding on some additional scheduled Tea Talks where we have the topic already selected. So hopefully we'll get those up by the end of this week. We'll see though. We still have several already showing that are scheduled, but we want to get those in there so we can get those topics on the books so that those people that requested it can plan to attend that. Please don't forget to like and subscribe here on YouTube. And also, if you like the stream, whichever one you watch, whichever episode you watch, if you like that particular episode, we'll know too more of what you might want to hear about. And always feel free to comment on them also. So if you guys missed one episode, the live streams still, stay on the YouTube channel under live, so you can look at all the past episodes and see what's also upcoming. Also, if you want to check us out on our regular website, you can visit us at stalkinghorseLLC.com, and we do put up some webinars on there as well as some additional information, and we have some Tea Talk information too. If anybody asks for me to share some information from any of these Tea Talks, I typically will post the documents on our Stalking Horse website. It just seems to be the easiest way for you guys to be able to get your hands on that information. Oh, Morgan, you're back. Hi, yeah, from Northern New York. How's the weather there? Everybody else, it's really hot. So maybe you guys have some nice cooler weather and humidity. I love upstate New York in the summertime. It's gorgeous. So it's got to be getting nice there. All right, I think we're about 4 or 5 minutes past the hour. I'm going to go ahead and start jumping into the topic, please make sure, you send your comments, send your questions, your chats. Tonight's going to be an interesting start to the next couple of episodes. Um, we're basically going to talk about evaluation and management services over the next couple of weeks. We get a lot of requests just through the year about, well, every year, just about auditing and then providing education to physicians and mid-level providers in regard to office visits, evaluation, and management services. So it's always a good topic in general. And typically when you perform audits, if education is requested, what you want to do is write that education based on your findings from the audit and really tailor it to the client and to their needs, because not everybody is the same. Not everyone necessarily needs everything from start to finish. So that's the difference between providing that education independently or specifically for a client versus doing something like this where it's going to be general unless you guys ask. So obviously, if you have a specific question that you're going to ask during this, you're going to get that answer. But otherwise, it's sort of like I get to kind of lead the way and walk you through. I did realize too that some providers know a lot less than we assume just based on experience. We have a lot of newer providers with some of the groups that we've done some work with over the years that have just been joining, and literally some of them are just coming out of like residency. And so it's like actually pretty fun to work with providers that are just kind of coming out of residency and getting into the real nuts and bolts of it, because they're really like fresh meat for us, right? They don't have any bad habits developed yet, or really any habits at all. So everything is like shiny and new. All the information they feel is wonderful. So that's really, really nice. And also on our side of it, since we focus on provider services, it's also good because we get to share with them how to make ends meet on their end, on their side. So typically when they're going through residency and whatnot, many providers will work in the hospital setting, and they get some education and they get queries sent and everything, but it's all related to the facility, the hospital services. So many of the things that they get questioned about and what they're taught just has to do with, to be quite frank, making the facility money, right? Getting the hospital's charges incorrectly, the hospital's documentation up to par for capturing those diagnoses that will get them that higher severity or the highest severity, to make sure they're getting compensated appropriately for the patient care that's delivered during the admission for that patient. But many of the providers they don't really understand necessarily why they're doing certain things, or when it comes to selection of the codes for their services, they have no idea why they're selecting one level over another, usually when they're, again, just kind of working through residency and coming out of that. And so it's really good to give them a solid review of what it is, what it means, how it works. And so when they start working on the practice side in private practice, obviously it's super important for them to understand how all this works, because it's how they make money. It's how they're going to keep the doors open, the lights on, and how they're going to continue to be able to see patients. So technically, evaluation and management services have a whole lot of codes in that category. And so we're going to narrow it down, focus on a specific section. And I'm going to share my screen here in a second. And I'm going to try not to talk too much while I do that, because I know sometimes that messes up the feed here. So we'll see. Morgan, you got back to us. 78 and humid. Well, that sounds a little like Tennessee, I think. And oh yes, Lindsay, I think this comment, they're not set in their ways. Yes, that's very true for the newer providers coming out. They're not set in their ways yet. And I'm going to actually talk a little bit more about that too, like why we feel that other providers may be a little bit more difficult to deal with when we're educating, because it's all about perspective. And I think understanding where someone else is coming from can help us to communicate better, honestly, putting yourself in their shoes. Let me try to share my screen here for a second. Let's see here. Okay, I'm not going to leave this up for too terribly long here, but I basically, this is the online books now. So you can get your coding books. If you order through the AAPC, you can actually get them online now. I don't really know if you're, I know some people are going to be like, oh, what do you recommend? What do you think? I'm not really sure what the future holds as far as, how I'll feel a year or two from now, but I still really like having the physical book in my hand. There's something to be said for that, and being able to write in it, highlight in it. It's nice having the online also, just because if you're working with your team, or again auditing, and you want to quickly flip through or go to a guideline or a section, guideline section, that it's a lot easier in that way. But obviously it's a lot easier for me to share this uh, because it's online versus the book in my hand. But um, I don't know, I'm just not 100% sold on the process yet. Plus I think when you go to test, you still need the physical books in hand. So I still really like having the physical books. But the whole point of sharing this with you is this is the CPT book from the AMA. And so it's the official coding book for current procedural terminology. And the evaluation and management section basically holds a ton of codes, from code numbers 99202 through 99499. And it includes all of these sections here. So office or other outpatient services, which we're going to focus on those office services today. But it also holds hospital inpatient and observation care services. So again, as many of those residents, if they're going to work in like primary care setting, they'll usually work as a hospitalist for a little bit. And so they get used to those evaluation and management codes, and also consultation codes. There's emergency department services. That's always an exciting section. Also nursing facility services, home or residence services, and then some prolonged service codes with or without direct patient contact. So literally we could have T-Talks on each and every one of these. There's just so much in this section that it's really too much to cover. And in fact, while we're going to stick to that topic of the office services, we're going to still break it up into, it's going to end up being like 4 T-Talks anyhow. So it's a lot to cover, but we're going to break it down here pretty good. So kind of going back to what I was saying before about understanding where providers are coming from. The newer providers, again, they don't really have a history with dealing with, selecting levels of service and coding and whatnot. So they're like really thirsty for information. And they're really open usually to listening. Other providers have been kind of, some of them that are established in practice have been through the ringer, right? They've some of them have really been through it, and they've heard so many different things over the years, probably from multiple different people. And then there's different guidelines between inpatient or hospital, again, services, facility services versus outpatient or uh, physician-based services. So they even sometimes feel like they're getting conflicting information when really it's not. It's just different guidelines because it's a different type of coding, but this is a whole profession. And so in a way, uh, I feel really bad for providers in that sense that, they go to school, they spend all that time and all that money and all those years learning on how to care for patients. And then in some instances, they're expected to just know this entire other profession and what to do and how it works. So those that have been in the field for a while, or I should say at least for uh, 5 years, would know that there have been different guidelines in place over the years for those evaluation and management services. So historically, the first set of like official guidelines that came out were in 1995. And then 2 years later, they did some updates. So then there was the official 1997 guidelines. And although they came out with the 1997 guidelines on how to select for levels of service, they didn't get rid of the 95. So then it became this whole thing of you could use 95 or 97. And I actually, just for the fun of it, I pulled up both sets of guidelines. And the 1995 official guidelines is 16 pages of information. And the 1997 is actually 49 pages of information. So I'm going to share that with you really quick. Oh, hi, Christy. No problem. Sorry you're late. Well, we're all, I thought earlier today, I thought it was Friday. So I, I, uh, I understand how you feel. So I really would have been in some trouble then if I didn't realize somehow that it actually was Tuesday. So, Lainey, yes. Why, or Aline, why confuse everyone? Great question. That is exactly what and how the providers have felt, right? Like, and just me telling you that about all these guideline changes and whatnot, when I show them to you, if you're newer into coding, or if you're a newer provider that's joined, you'll just be shocked at what those guidelines look like. But I do feel that it's important to share because although history wasn't my favorite subject, just because remembering dates and names and everything was very challenging, I do appreciate it because it helps us to understand and learn other perspectives and be better in the future. But again, this really puts things into perspective for us, especially if you work as or are looking into becoming an auditor or consultant or doing any kind of provider education, because you have to understand where they're coming from to be the best communicator that you can when educating on this stuff. So let me see here again. Let me share. So this is a 97. Let me click on the 95 really quick. So again, these 1995 guidelines was 16 pages. And it's pretty detailed. It goes through, again, what evaluation and management services are and how it all works. And it breaks down into the different elements that they consider. I'm not going to give a full presentation on that because, again, that'd be a whole nother story. But essentially, there were 3 key components to the documentation when we talk about like office visits and leveling. It was history, examination, and medical decision making. So they go through all of that in here, of course, through 16 pages. Then when they updated in 1997, because you're probably saying, well, what the heck did they need the 97 for? They added some more specifics in there mainly regarding the examination element. So in the 95 guidelines, the examination section was very general. So, and again, in examination, they're talking about the actual physical exam that the provider that you would document, like, what the lungs sound like, how the patient looks, what their heart sounds like, if you examine the abdomen, all of those areas. But they didn't really think about, I believe in 95, some of the specialists. So just on this document here, you'll see that they ended up breaking down the exam where they focused in more on, like, for example, if you're in orthopedics, you're probably going to focus your exam to the musculoskeletal system, or neurology, neurological exam, or psychiatry, psychiatric, pulmonary, respiratory. So they became more detailed with that exam section, right? So they wanted people to be able to choose, or providers to be able to choose, then do you want to go by the 95 guidelines, which include a very general exam? It's just like a multi-system general examination. Or if you want, you can use the 97, and then we have the examination broken out with more specifics. There was a couple of very small differences also in the history, but nothing to really write home about, and nothing that we really need to talk about now since these guidelines are old. So from 1997, they did not change the guidelines again until 2020. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. But anyway, a long time went by. And the reason that, again, that's important to remember is that we had all of these years then that those guidelines were being pounded into the minds of all of our providers. And it really shaped the way that they started documenting their office visits. So they started creating more templated notes, where it was then tailored to help them meet the expectations of these guidelines. And so then it helped them in adhere to what they were being asked to document. And then when auditing and such was being performed, just like it is now today, which we'll talk about, but there was auditing tools out there. So here's an example of a pretty popular one that was used for the 95 and 97 guidelines. So again, I said there was 3 elements. So we used to have to level out each element. So history, we would level out the history of present illness, and you had 2 different ways you could look at that. Review of systems, past family social history. So what did they document on these elements that all belong to the key component history? And then this is the examination, and this is geared toward the 95, where this is a organ system or body areas general exam, and you would level that out. And for the medical decision making, this is what that looked like also. So this was really being just, again, hammered into the minds of the providers that this is what's expected of you. And if you want to select a certain code level, then, you have to meet, these little requirements. And there was a lot to it. And it really, again, blew up the world of documentation with templates and checkboxes. And they would start just documenting, even whether or not things mattered, is what we started to realize, it would be documented. So then the Medicare and the payers started, talking more about medical necessity and telling the providers, look, just because you may document a very comprehensive history doesn't mean it was necessary. So we're only going to give you credit for what is medically necessary. And then that started a whole nother conversation and a whole big other can of worms, right? So we got some comments here. So Christy, you have a few auditors in your study group and they're always having to whip out the 95 and 97 from time to time. Yeah, honestly, the one thing I can say that's still super helpful with those is, let me share my screen again here. So this table here is a table of risk. And there are some examples within this table that still assist today with the new guidelines. Oddly enough, there are some things, and we can talk about that as we work through the next couple of tea talks. So Christy, that's not, I mean, it's funny, but it's not surprising, but it is true too, because I'll have conversations with some colleagues that I've worked with through the years, and sometimes it's just interesting because still refer back to the risk or what have you. And, again, a lot of providers, then this was really hammered into them and they were like, look, I have to document this way and my style is this way. And it became a game of like counting. And okay, well, how many elements did I hit here? And how many did I document there? And then count that up and it equals this. And so, or how many diagnoses did I put down? And is this a new problem or an established problem? So they really became set in this way and they started learning how to document that way. It also helped. I have to say, I feel like it really helped the software vendors out a lot because they would, they want to build this software and make it capable of doing certain things. Then they could market it to the providers like, oh, look, we can like help you build your templates and you can tailor it in this way. And it's going to make things move so much faster for you. All that documentation you have to do just with a click of a button, you can just mark everything as normal, or, you could save this template for patients that come in with a rash, or this one for patients that come in with COPD, or this one for patients that come in with diabetes. And in theory, it's sounds nice, when you think about it that, as a provider, oh, wow, I could have these templates and it's going to make it easier. Like whatever their problem is that they're coming in for, I'm going to be able to click on that and it's going to fill out stuff for me. But it really led to like a lot of problems. And the biggest problem was the documentation just became so big. And I hate to use this word because it sounds so fancy, but very voluminous, right? So, but it became so large, but it really didn't have a lot of substance to it. Not a lot of quality information. So then too, sometimes in sending notes to other providers, some of them would just get annoyed, like, oh my gosh, get to the meat of it already. What do I need to know about this patient? Because there's so much in there that maybe they really didn't need. Oh, so Chantley, you got to say, I do not miss the old guidelines. Yeah, to be honest, I don't either. I really don't. When it comes to just day-to-day coding and auditing, I don't miss them either. Oh, because it was a lot. It was a lot. Yeah, Lindsay, you do miss that risk table. Again, I can see it. The new way that we'll talk about it, they don't give as many examples. So Christy, what do you say? Your conversation with auditors are great. Yeah. Well, I guess too, it depends on if you're the subject of the audit or or not, right? So I've had that happen too, just over the years where, and kind of advancing in my career in different positions I was in and having to be audited myself. It's always interesting. So I always think back to that too. Like I have a different approach, I think, than many auditors do, where the goal really is to encourage improvement. And I think historically, old school, it was a lot of like fire and brimstone and like put the fear into everybody, like you must do this or that. And I don't really think that works most of the time. I think that again, providers got so fed up with all of these requirements and everything that just goes on deaf ears. Like they just wanted to do their job and do it well and document what matters. So kind of back to what we were saying, medical necessity became like a big deal because the more documentation that you have doesn't necessarily mean that it's valid or quality, and in some cases necessary, right? So that became the big talk is, hey, what's necessary? And honestly, I can't speak for them, but I would say that my guess would be that was a big reason for the change in the guidelines. So I'm going to show you the difference in the table from before. Again, let me show you that. So again, this is that table before. It's a couple pages. Okay. And then this is it now. Let me try to make it a little bigger here for you. This is it. It's a one pager. Everyone loves a one pager, even with resumes. Everyone loves a one pager. We were just talking about that the other day. So they went from a tool being 3 pages, sometimes longer, depending on which tool was being used and whatnot, but to it being 1 page. And then in addition to that, we went from it being 3 individual elements, the history, exam, and medical decision making, to just being medical decision making now. So everything is now focused on medical decision making. So the great thing about that was that the new rules state that a medically necessary or appropriate history and exam is good enough. But when you're actually using the documentation for selection of a level, you would use that medical decision making, which essentially is the assessment and plan. There are some pieces of it that you can get from other places, which we'll talk about, but the assessment and plan essentially is what's used to determine the level of service. So we went from that very complicated, history exam, medical decision making, all of these bullet points, all that stuff, to now a one pager that focuses on medical decision making. But they still did keep, like, what did they say in that? I think there was like show Charmed or whatever, like the power of 3. So they they still kept 3 elements. So there's 3 elements of medical decision making that will make up the level of service. So, and that's how the next couple of T-Talks are going to go. So this one's an overview, and then we're going to break down each element. So each T-Talk will be one of the elements of medical decision making, then to tie it all together. So I think that's going to make sense. But with that table, because remember that there was the official guidelines also, it wasn't limited to the auditing tool, right? They gave written guidelines in order to walk you through how to do it. So they have that. And they updated it January 1st of 2023. There were some updates to it, and it's 42 pages. But this does include all of those codes that we had talked about before. So hospital, inpatient and observation care, some, nursing facility visits. So it does include all of those. And again, we're only focusing in on the office codes. So with that being said, we took this table and then just popped in the codes on the left-hand side over here to make it easier to talk about. So the codes during the next few T-Talks that we're going to be going over is really the 99202 through 99215. We also have 99211 on here, but that's a visit. That's a nurse visit. Doesn't require the presence of a physician or mid-level provider. So really, we're focusing on the 99202 through 99215 and walking through these elements. So I'm just curious here, um, if anybody in here has actually done any recent um, videos or education on these guidelines. I'm just curious if you wouldn't mind commenting in there. I know that AAPC from time to time has new webinars they put out, and I think recently too they were doing this. I don't know if it was free or not. I'm trying to remember. They were doing something where they were saying like audit results, like going over audit results from prior years, like E&Ms and such. So I guess they're trying to give everybody some feedback and context to certain things. And then we also have NAMUS, that's organization that's for auditing. So I'm just curious if you guys find any of those helpful, to be honest. But it's a lot of information to digest, especially for those just learning it. And I'm sorry, I'm smiling because I'm just thinking about for some people that I know have joined because obviously I've known some of you for a really long time, and we've had here at Stalking Horse several um, coders that we have taken in from honestly fresh out of school and that we have worked with to help train and build them up. And it's always so interesting to see that first look of just fresh fear when they look at the first note that the providers put together and they try to figure out what the level of evaluation and management service is. Ah, Christy, so you're still in school. I was wondering that. Very good. Awesome. How long have you been in for? What are you working on now? Maybe the group, we can all start supporting you and helping you. I know that several in this group have I've known several in here that have started again from in school and have really done exceptionally well. Just so fantastic. But yeah, there's a certain fear that we see runs through everyone when they first get out there. And I think the evaluation and management coding, oddly, tends to be the most shocking. So that was another reason that we decided to go over it. And it's, complicated. A lot of the other coding, it's like, okay, this is what they did. This is the procedure. What's the code? But for the evaluation and management side, it's like you're looking at this whole note, this whole thing. Patient comes in and this is what they're complaining of. And then there's all this history information. And okay, what did the doctor do? Okay, well, they did this exam. What does that mean? And their assessment is what? Their diagnoses. Okay, what's the plan? How in the world do I figure all that out? So it's pretty interesting. Now that these guidelines are again like a one pager and it's focused on one element, I think that the schools are going to get better at teaching it. I know that, oh gosh, so many years ago, I don't know, because I've been certified since, I don't even know, like 2005, something like a long time ago, is all I know. So, but when I went to school, they did not ever dive into those elements and how do you audit, how do you break that down. And I remember asking like, well, how do I know? Like they would just tell you, they'd give you a question and they would say, the history is expanded problem focused and the exam is comprehensive and medical decision making was of high complexity. And it's like, well, how do you know if that the history is this or that the exam is that? I never got a straight answer when I was in school for it because they were really training us on, honestly, at that time, they were really training us on what do you need to know for your examination. But I wanted to know, what do I need to know when I don't have anybody here and I'm at the job and I'm actually working in this? How am I going to know then? So uh, historically, that also was the experience that I saw many coders had coming into it. And providers also is the same thing, the same fresh fear of, well, what do I actually need to document? Because for providers, we were just actually working with one the other day that just got out of residency. And he was like, well, I just don't know what you need to know. And so walking through the guidelines and the high points of it, and then explaining this one pager to him, not because it's not that he had to become an expert coder on it. It's not that I recommend that for providers. Obviously, I recommend that coders be available to all providers. At minimum, to have a certain percentage of their documentation reviewed to ensure that they are documenting appropriately, things are being captured, nothing's being missed, and that their levels are appropriate. Some places it's just not feasible that they can have somebody review every single note. But I certainly don't recommend that they be responsible for everything. And they, again, it's a whole profession. This is an entire profession. So it's just crazy to think that they be responsible for, all their clinical stuff they went to school for, now learning another whole entire career, right? So they, in going through this with that provider, it's just like super eye-opening. And again, he's fresh out of school and had worked in the hospital setting, but totally was appreciative and understanding, like, oh, wow, okay, this is what this means to me, or this is why I need to be specific when I'm documenting in, putting my diagnoses in. It all makes sense now. So let's see, Christy. So you said, okay, you started in January and you're sitting for your CCA on July 1st. Then you graduate in October and sit for your CCS. Oh, interesting. Okay. So that's an interesting path. I know a couple of people too that did kind of both sides of coding, inpatient and outpatient. And it's I think it's good. It's certainly interesting while you're doing it to see the difference in the two. And I think that it's helpful for you to decide also like which end you want to go into. But the facility side of it, hospital setting side, is very different. You'll see as you kind of go through. I kind of think it seems to be a bit easier because it's less, how do I want to say it? It's less code sets. It's less code sets than the physician side. Oh, you've been looking into risk adjustment and auditing after the CCS. Those two areas interest you. I also see an AAPC certifications. I see. I don't honestly have a, I don't have a preference. Like if we hire coders, we don't discriminate, right? Like against which, if it's like HEMA or AAPC at all. I mean, I recognize that they're both businesses. I know a couple people get a little sour because there's another certification out there, the CBCS, Certified Billing and Coding Specialist, and a lot of schools will include that in there, but it's not really, it's a very basic certification, very basic exam. And I say that because I know, because I was CBCS certified. I didn't continue to carry it because it doesn't, that one typically doesn't hold any value with getting a job somewhere. So, but risk adjustment is also like super nice to get into. And then depending on your furthering of your education, Christy, like if you, like the higher degrees you get to, I know with a HEMA, there's other avenues that you can take on like inpatient side with clinical documentation improvement. So they have it on the outpatient side from AAPC. They have like the CDEO. I have that certification, but it's very different from it being physician-based versus hospital or inpatient-based. So eventually you'll have to choose a side. So you'll go to the dark side or stay with the light, or I don't know the Star Wars reference right now off the top of my head, but yeah, you have to choose one or the other eventually. It would be really tough to continue with both sides. And again, if you're going to, wherever you're going to work, it's either going to be usually one It's going to be one route or the other, not both. And if memory serves me correctly, I think Madison, I think you're in here. I think you've joined tonight. And I believe that you had that same conundrum, right? Like you were debating on which route, which path to take. So you might be able to comment to Christy on that if Christy has any difficulty with choosing. So well, let me jump back over here. I want to show you guys this table again. So with this table, what we're going to focus on again is the 3 elements. So before, again, they used to do history exam and medical decision making. Now it's just based on medical decision making, and the 3 parts of medical decision making are listed here in these columns. So these are all the individual elements. And the key to this table, and obviously, or well, not obviously, but honestly, leveling is pay attention to the fine print. And it does help. The more you kind of think and read into this and use your critical thinking skills, the better it will get. And just experience and time. So the next T-Talk will be talking about the number and complexity of problems addressed. So we'll focus in on this element. And then after that, it will be amount and or complexity of data to be reviewed and analyzed. So we'll go through this element. And then risk of complications and or morbidity or mortality of patient management. And each one of these, you would look down that column and then decide whether the documentation supports that particular element being at this specific level. So for example, you may determine that number and complexity of problems addressed, maybe it meets this high level criteria here. So the number and complexity of problems addressed may support a level 5 visit, but that doesn't mean that that's the code you can choose. So again, I said pay attention to that fine print. So the level of medical decision making is based on 2 out of the 3 elements. So 2 out of these 3 elements here need to either meet or exceed the code level that you are going to use in order to again be compliant and meet that. So it's 2 out of the 3, and I'm working on also bringing in some good documentation examples for us to talk about and go over. I love doing that. They would say, like, what, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and it's totally true. And in doing any kind of education, that's why I said earlier, if you work on an audit and then they are asking you also to provide education, whether it be to their coding team or to their providers, using their documentation and giving examples and applying it in that education is just awesome, and it's super important to do. And that's honestly what most of them pay for. Like, that's what they want, because they may be able to attend something general, something, you know, from the AAPC, whatever, but there's nothing quite like the provider being able to say, well, hey, I documented this. This is what I thought. What did you think? And that's exactly what an audit does. So again, it's not all about, you know, punishment or being negative. It's more about education and sharing. And you'd be surprised, again, just how many times it's not that they're like, if they're selecting, let's say they're selecting 4s and you're seeing 3s. Sometimes it's not that, oh, they just are, you know, coding too high or whatever. It's because they don't realize what they're supposed to be documenting. Oh, well, I didn't know that I had to be more specific about the condition, that, you know, it's chronic, or that it's exacerbated, or that there's some kind of progression here. I knew that was going on in my head because I was talking to the patient, but I didn't document it. So again, there's a difference there. And what we actually see, we we're essentially trying to read their minds, right? So for the providers in here, when a code is being assigned, we're really trying to get inside of your head and understand what was the complexity of that visit and what level of service is really supported based on that. But we don't know unless you tell us. And you can only tell us if you document it, right? So they used to use this term all the time. If it wasn't documented, it wasn't done. And then they, went to think in ink. Nobody uses really, well, I shouldn't say nobody because some still do, but not many providers are documenting by hand anymore. And if you audit some of those records, gosh, good luck to you because it's super hard. The handwriting can be a really big bear. So yeah, it's the more providers understand what is being looked at, what is being expected of them, right? They have to know what's being expected in order to appropriately know what they need to say, what they need to document, and help us out. So there's usually not a lot of pushback when you build that relationship on mutual understanding and support and being helpful. So I typically, I do my best to take that approach and try to be educational. Oh yeah. So Christy, you need all the advice you can get. I think we've all felt that way at one point or another. So we will do our best here in this community to help support you. I know, again, like our team that we have is just great. We do have a lot of support here internally, and I am so thankful for that. We have just such a great team. So Lindsay, thank God a lot do not document. Yeah, I know, right? Like it's tough. And I used to do some traveling education and audits when risk adjustment actually first came about. I got a job with an insurance company that was in Tampa, Florida. It was called Citrus Healthcare. They're no longer out there, but they're not in business anymore. But when I worked with them, they were just getting into the risk adjustment game, and they were actually pretty progressive, forward thinking. And they were, my boss there, well, he ended up being my boss. He hunted me down. I was teaching coding and totally loved it, enjoyed my job, was not looking for anything. He would not stop hounding me to come and work for them. And I was like, ignoring his calls. He kept calling. And then I wasn't even looking for a job. I finally called the guy back just to say, hey, I'm not looking for work. And he was like, no, just hear me out. Well, I did end up going to work for them. It was a very interesting opportunity. I just was not expecting it. So it was when risk adjustment was first emerging on the scene. And so it was new and interesting. And those who know me know that I love a challenge. I love anything new and interesting. So I joined the team, and my job was to travel, review documentation, and provide education in order to avoid exposure and risk from the insurance company that I worked for, because they had to provide information, data to Medicare to get reimbursement for those risk adjustment patients. So they needed to be sure that the data they were supplying was accurate. And the data they were obtaining was from claims from providers. So if the providers were not reporting or documenting appropriately with supporting the codes that they reported in, it would put us at risk with Medicare. And, that's never a good thing. Any kind of governmental payer in particular, you don't want to be in trouble with them for any kind of wrong reporting or anything like that. So, but at that time, there was still a lot of providers documenting by hand, and it was really tough. And a few would get super upset because I would have to say that the visit's not supported, like the codes are not supported, because I couldn't read it. And it needed to be legible. That was one of the rules. Even to the point, too, that sometimes the office managers would come out and say, well, I'll read it to you. And then they would just be rattling something off. I had no idea if what they were reading was really what was written down or not. I couldn't read it, and I would have to say, I'm really sorry, but I still can't accept it. I cannot read it. I don't know if what you're telling me is what's there. So that's not allowed, but that was certainly a challenge. That was a difficult one. So I am grateful, I guess, for those software companies in their development and our advancement in technology, if for nothing else, for the fact that we don't have to try to decipher those hieroglyphics anymore on paper. Thank goodness. And I just realized a minute ago that I forgot to share with you guys the tea for tonight. So the tea is just an Earl Grey tea. And I had some delicious homemade baklava that I ate just prior to joining, and it went so well with my tea, and it was delicious. So I love baklava. I didn't know, I had not tried this. It was, homemade, and oh my gosh, it was really, really good. So now I'm afraid, because there's a whole plate of it that's in the refrigerator, and I need to not eat the entire plate by myself if I can avoid it. So anyhow, I will avoid eating the whole tray of baklava and continue drinking my tea. Is anybody else drinking any special tea tonight that they want to share? Oh, is Christy, is baklava your favorite? Mine is well, I love baklava, but I also love chocolate covered strawberries. Oh my gosh, they're so delicious. For Mother's Day, I ended up with like 3 dozen chocolate covered strawberries, I think it was, or 3 half dozen. I think 3 half dozen. But anyway, I ate every single one of them myself. Not all at one time, but yeah, they're delicious. I have a weakness for those. Yeah, don't do it. I know I'll end up with a stomach ache if I eat that whole tray. And Lindsay, you want to make baklava? I don't know. I don't know. That looks like how you spell it. I don't know if that's how you spell it either. But you did good. If it's not, it looks like it. I don't know. I'm not. I think there's a couple of really good spellers on here, but I am not one of them. To be honest, I'm glad that we have spell check. But yeah, baklava. Oh my gosh, so delicious. I have a recipe for it. I have never made it homemade. Still haven't done that. Chocolate layered yogurt bites today. Oh, you're killing me, Christy. You're killing me. Oh man, that sounds good. Well, I wonder too if the yogurt depends on the type of yogurt though too, I guess, whether it's like vanilla or it's like plain. But either way, if it's got a little chocolate on it, it gives it the sweetness, right? I used to make some of the like chocolate and coconut and put those together and make little like clusters. And it was like a healthier, because I would use dark chocolate, so it was like a healthier version of a snack. It was pretty good. Not too bad, especially if you were dieting or anything, like trying to find something sweet, but then that's not too bad for you. Yeah. So strawberry with fresh raspberries. Oh my gosh. You're lucky you live in so far away in Arkansas, because I would be knocking at your door saying, let me try one of these. So delicious. So, oh wow, it's actually almost up to an hour. I didn't even realize what time it was. So hopefully I gave you guys a good kind of overview of the whole concept of, hey, then and now, and what we're going to do here. So again, next Tea Talk, we will break down that number and complexity of problems addressed. And I'll try to have some good examples up here for you guys. And if anybody has any good examples that they want to share, just, let us know, and we'll work together, and we can get your example up on the screen. We can go through it. So you don't have to be shy, and we don't have to say who it was from if you don't want us to know. But so even any providers, we can share your your information on here as far as what review you want us to go through, like what documentation you want reviewed. So totally willing to do that. We love doing it. So thank you guys again so much for joining tonight. I'm going to not eat any more baklava or any more chocolate covered strawberries for the night, but I will finish my tea. And I will see you guys, I guess, next week. So another tea talk coming up in 7 days. So thank you, Christy. Yes, it was a great discussion. Can't wait to talk again next week. Eileen, thank you for joining. And until next time, I will see you guys again next Tuesday. Have a good night.